Morgan, do you want to roll straight into it, like presentation-wise, or just do a bit of a round intro?
Oh, if you want to introduce yourself and then just get into your presentation, we can just introduce
Okay.
go along. Yeah.
No, that's all right. Yeah, welcome everyone who's tuning in. Yeah, Ed Scott work with Field Systems, looking at soil advisory and soil management, and obviously the key thing at the moment is looking at this fertiliser situation and working through how can we make the sort of support making the best decisions for different producers in different growing conditions, paddock history and alike, and how we work out this best path forward during this sort of, I guess, complicated time around this decision making. So just want to lead into a presentation. I'll just share the screen. Presentations coming up. All good. Perfect. So yeah, just obviously on this discussion of making fertiliser decisions in this current climate, just wanted to give an overview from the I guess starting with the nitrogen and phosphorus piece. It's obviously the key factor we're sort of trying to make decisions on now, working out whether we've got the supply and how we best allocate that across the field. So yeah, open to questions as we go through, but thought we'd just introduce sort of what the key elements are that we need to be focusing on, and I guess helping support that decision making for the different growers. So obviously the nitrogen and phosphorus pricing for the 2022 sees a big driver for this decision making, and I guess we need to weigh up how much of effect we need it to have, I guess, directly on how we actually change our rates around and how we actually use it as, I guess, a kickstart to think how can we potentially be managing some of these soil types better, more appropriately for their, I guess, their response as far as nitrogen and phosphorus management goes. So critically, I think we've got to boil this focus down to the starter fertiliser piece, because the MAP and the DAP price, yeah, has effectively doubled. So trying to sort of join the dots on what does it mean for us at the start of the season, because that's our one point of intervention is at sowing, and that's when the critical time is to get the phosphorus in. So for me, I've really been basing a lot of the decisions around what our phosphorus requirements are, and then working in that nitrogen piece on the back end of that, which is more seasonal dependent. So allocation is currently unknown for a lot of people. Some people have been fortunate enough to be able to seemingly secure tonnages that they require. Others are still up in the air. So I know different people are going to be in different scenarios. So just trying to keep it, I guess, you the right questions and the right thought processes around how do we help make this decision making around what we should be applying. And yeah, so just link that variation in for different growers, and I guess different people are going to have to make different decisions around this. So starting with phosphorus, I guess at the end of the day, sort of boiling it down to one, knowing your current status. I guess part of that's current status mentally around what does it actually mean for when these fertiliser prices are doubling, and how big an impact does that have on your own business. And each business is going to be different around their flexibility or elastic band stretch they've got capacity for around the fertiliser program. But also know your current status, as in know our current status of phosphorus. That there are a lot of assumptions that still get made around phosphorus currently in stores, within properties. Even similar management history has completely different availability around phosphorus. So we've really got to link our current status of the fertiliser, I guess, banks in our soils, especially around phosphorus, and how that links back to the soil type. So this year is going to be critical around understanding your soil types and which ones have the capacity to really, I guess, go above and beyond, and really, I guess, have a good P bank, be able to have good accessibility of that P, and I guess go in knowing you can back off on certain soil types for at least a year, and but others that they just can't handle the back off on phosphorus. It's going to cost you more in the long run by backing off than keeping going. So I guess building that in is just having the confidence to know where you can reduce rates. A lot of the whole variable rate story is really just how do you build the confidence in knowing that if I do back off or if I do add more there, it's going to have the right return on investment. We don't want this whole scenario to, yes, there's a cost up front with fertilizer, but we don't want it to cost us at the back end. And phosphorus is one of those things that if we miss it at the start, we just can't catch it up. So really we want to make a well-measured decision around phosphorus and how we can tackle that. So at the end of the day, it's sort of working back on some of the basics around crop removal, is making sure we're not falling short on the basics. I guess it's quite easy to think that there are other, I guess, management strategies around that can lead to, well, I guess, open the option to say, should I be using this or should I be using another product, is let's boil it back down to what our crops are going to remove and use that as that starting point. Then we can work on that efficiency out of the different soil types. So something like phosphorus, around that 3 kilograms per tonne is what is, I guess, at the end of the day, removed in that grain. So that's what's actually been removed. Plus we've got to grow to stubble. And I guess we've got that inefficiency as well in the system, depending on our soil types, that we've got to be accounting for what we're removing plus the inefficiency in our soil. So we've got these minimum requirements we've got to be hitting, which is where we've just got to understand where we are to start with, to know how far we can push it, I guess push it as in backing it off, if that's the desired pathway or the only pathway that we've got in front of us, depending on your situation. So understanding where we are, especially on the nitrogen and phosphorus around our key removals, is just one not to forget. And I guess boiling back to this chart, it's always just, I guess, when you look at your own soil test, just think about, right, how are my soils delivering this sort of nutrition, and how is it exporting, I guess, from the whole system. Even when we go down to pastures and the impact of growing livestock as well, there is a net removal out of that. And we've got to be making sure that this year, that with the cost of fertilizer there is, we're not costing ourselves in the long run by falling short on those fertilizer applications. So part of that is knowing your limitations. So when we look at the soils, we've got to be understanding which soils can give us the phosphorus back and which ones are going to be tying it up. And really on the phosphorus one, it's so vulnerable to tie up. It's a great nutrient for sticking in the soil, not such a great nutrient for getting out of the soil. So we've got to work out how we best manage that. And critically, it's going to be linking back to how we get these plants up and going. Phosphorus is needed to help bounce plants out of the ground. But we also need plants to be bouncing out of the ground, growing good, healthy root systems, to be able to actually scavenge and go exploring the soil to mine or extract the P that is that we're testing in our soil tests. Because if we've got a soil test, we've got good coal P or DGTP numbers, the only thing that's going to be stopping us from accessing that is the moisture availability and the root systems that we're growing. So we've really just got to work out how are we making sure that we're, I guess, setting our early vigor up in a way that we can be extracting the P, especially if we are going to be backing it off and relying on some of that P bank to drive some of that P requirement. So there's a lot of just basic elements we've got to be understanding on the different soil types. And a lot of these key elements here, as far as soil constraints are, a lot of people have varying degrees of all of these across their whole farm. So it's trying to work out which is the key element on southern end of the farm, to the northern end, to the rising ground, to the lower country, is what is actually holding some of that country back. And is that a negative impact on phosphorus availability or early vigor? Because that's really what we've got to boil it down to when we start working out some of these decisions. Key one really, and something we can actually do something quite like readily on, is the pH factor on phosphorus availability. And we've just got some real flexes in there, I guess, the upper north region on high pH soils. So we've got the calcium tie-up with phosphorus, and then we've also got a lot of surface acidity occurring. So these more acid soils, which has been a bit of a sleeper that a lot of people are now finding, that we've got these low pH or acidic topsoils that are now causing other issues on the other end, on the acidic end, for phosphorus tie-up. So really a simple one to make sure we're getting most efficiency out of our P is making sure our pH is in a ideal zone. So that pH management is a critical one. So the testing element to that is a real key piece, and we've got to, I guess, be weighing up is what's the cost of testing, and can this cost of testing help offset the high fertilizer prices. So phosphorus, we've got to know our numbers. There's no point having taking a stab in the dark on trying to work out what we should be increasing or backing off as far as phosphate goes. We've got to know our phosphorus availability and then know where our soil constraints sit. So I'll touch on the pH, salinity and acidicity. There's another one, salinity, the salts. If you've got saltier soil, the capacity of the plants to extract that phosphate has been reduced. And then soil acidicity, if we've got high sodium in soils, we've got poor soil structure, we don't have the good root exploration, we're going to have also impact on that phosphorus availability, and furthermore leading on to nitrogen as well. So linking it all back is we've got to try and hone this in as what's your minimum viable application rate, and this really needs to be per field, per soil type, per crop rotation. So we've got to understand what is our phosphorus numbers existing in the soil, and you'll see Coal P or DGTP, depending on your soil types, and different soils have some really good desirable ranges now being built around the DGTP, and especially if you're on the higher pH soils, the more limestoney soils, the DGTP has been really helpful for that. So linking that Coal P and the PBI, which is your phosphorus buffering index, so how much of that phosphate is essentially going to be tied up as we apply it. So we've got to make sure that we're not backing off on some of these soil types that need a critical amount of phosphorus to actually keep some availability. So we've just got to really understand what our soils are doing, make sure we're hitting these numbers. For a lot of growers I'm working with, really try and avoid going down below around that 9 kilos of P per hectare. Just trying to keep that phosphate going in the system is a real critical piece. And sort of that 40 to 45 kilos of your sort of MAP, DAP kind of blends is really as lean, I guess from the cropping perspective, is as lean as I'd like to go. Others, yeah, and there's other research around where on a one-off application go down to around the 5-6 kilos of P per hectare. But for me, I'd like to keep it up around that 9 kilos and push further on from there. We're also going to be looking at these alternative sources of P as well. And I know a lot of people have been able to get their hands on some manures or compost or biosolids. These are really beneficial in the system, can help build up the whole phosphorus and nutrient bank. We've got to be aware there can be a bit of a lag phase on the availability of the phosphorus that is in these products. So the sooner we can get them on, get some rainfall and get that cycling through, the more availability we'll have. But quite often it could be the year after the application we'll see some of the benefit, especially on some of the like the likes of the biosolids. So this step into nitrogen, obviously, like we're looking at what this summer is going to hold. So summer rainfall is going to be a real critical one on our nitrogen availability going into this coming year. So when we start looking at nitrogen budgets, I mean, coming off the start of this year, not so much summer rain. We didn't have that, well, it depends on which area you are, didn't have as much mineralisation. And yeah, that mineralisation is critical for driving that early or full season nitrogen availability. So summer rainfall really got to be taken into account, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes for this coming season. So crop history and rotation, really big driver on our nitrogen availability and what we've got there on hand, and also what we're going to need there in future. So still don't lose sight of your rotation in this whole system, and work out how we can best adjust it to make it happen. And yeah, which is linking to that strategy beyond 2022. We can't get too short-sighted on this 1 year of high prices. What does it actually mean for our whole rotation over the next 5 years if we change our fertilizer strategy around this year? So nitrogen mineralisation, everyone talks about it, but just thought I'd just go back over just some of the key elements to it. So obviously the rainfall, your organic matter or your organic carbon in your soil is a real critical driver on what mineralisation of nitrogen we're actually going to get in the system. So again, understanding your soil numbers is going to help you calculate how much nitrogen should be budgeting on what we'll have in the soil. So rainfall plus organic matter plus the warm soils is a real drive for that mineralisation. And so there's some simple calculations around for getting some ballpark nitrogen mineralisation volumes. So yeah, working on that. Yeah, that moisture by the organic matter is that key linkage there. Still, we'll highly recommend doing the deep end testing, and it doesn't have to be every paddock. It's picking off the back of back of a wheat rotation or back of a legume rotation. I guess in different areas where your properties might be located as far as rainfall, just get a bit of a ballpark idea of what your deep end is doing on the back of this summer, depending on what rainfall we have. Then we can have confidence to go into the season knowing what our nitrogen requirements can be and whether we can back off or push it harder in certain areas. So nitrogen is obviously seasonal dependent compared to phosphorus, which we've got to be, so I guess you've only got that one intervention piece at the start of the season. So we've got more flexibility around the nitrogen element, but we've still got to be working out how we're playing it with the season, obviously, especially with the pricing that it is. So soil moisture, obviously the key driver for the nitrogen requirements and how we move that forward. So I guess we've got the moisture there. How do we make sure that we've got the end requirements matched up? Don't over push them too hard, depending on what the spring is going to do and how we balance that out. So that's going to be one that frames up as the summer comes along. But still, we've got to do our budgets on those target yield and protein levels, all links back to that crop removal and sets that budget requirement. Just got to remember, if we're falling short on any of those numbers, if we're falling short on our yield targets, as far as the nitrogen budget goes, we're only going to be costing ourselves in the long run. But at the end of the day, when we are chasing this, it's still critical to focus on those 4 R's, and it's going to be a real critical one this year for that right time and right place, and how, I guess, that form of those fertilizers. Do we go the granule? Is it worth going the liquids, like the UAN type approach? We've got sulfate of ammonia, you've got manures, you've got different sources of nitrogen that we can introduce into the system, but we've got to, I guess, link that back into how much organic hemp we're pulling in out of the mineralisation pool. So this year is a real kicker for, I guess, a lot of interest around variable rate and variable rate management of fertilizers. And the best thing is, due to their higher input, have huge benefits around getting the variable rate right with them and have a great fit for the variable rate system. So really do advise for you to explore your own data sources. And if you've been sitting on some of your own data, whether it's yield maps, protein maps, pH, EM, NEVI, is now starting to dig into that and say, how can I use this data to help support better decision making around where I should be going higher or could be backing off some of these rates of either nitrogen or phosphorus. So really, yeah, is worth breaking into some of that data. And there's a great talent pool in the Upper North Farming Systems group who can help interrogate some of this data to help you make those best decisions around that. So utilize the data and have confidence in your own decisions around where you're going to back off and push it harder. So from there, so as far as that path forward, if you can secure it, do you actually need to reduce rates? Think about your own system, think about your rotation, and can we actually afford to keep pushing along at our standard rates? Because when we look at some of the budget, yes, the fertilizer budget has increased, but how much is that relative to what we could be yielding at the other end, especially if we do go into this season with good soil moisture, if this summer keeps pushing on the back of this late spring rainfall. So, and if you can't secure it, really support understanding your variability. So know how much variability you've got in your fields and know your constraints, because is the variability linked to a constraint, or is the variability of phosphorus or nitrogen availability independent of a constraint, but the constraint is actually going to limit your uptake of it, the availability of it. So there's a volume game, and then there's actually the efficiency of the uptake. So we've got to balance those two. So target that response by soil type. We're going to back ourselves in, understand your soil types, understand that tie-up. If we've got the high pH, if we've got clayier soils, we won't necessarily have the availability that you will on some of the sandier soils. So we can play around with our rates and be able to push that as required. If you have these existing data, use it. Really do implore you to dig into your own data and try and understand it further. And I think this is a really good year to invest strategically into data if you don't have it, to support your decisions. that grid sampling of fields, whether it's phosphorus or pH or both. Great to do at the same time to be able to understand what's our pH doing in relation to our phosphorus and how do we match that. And it doesn't have to be every paddock, but it's just got to be like linking in where it fits in with your rotation, and then looking at the targeted soil testing. So looking at the deep end and S can be a bit more strategic around the place. So I guess there's sort of, I guess, some of the key elements that we're looking at around how we can help support this decision making. Yeah, obviously it's a broad path around who's got what as far as volumes locked in, but yeah, happy to take further questions around what yeah, more case by case scenarios. But that's a wrap from me. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Was there any questions for Ed at all? No questions. All right, Azzy, did you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'll just get in, share screen. What have we got there? Hold on. No. Should just come in on my screen, shouldn't it? I think. Out of there. Can everyone see that now on that screen? Is that?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Just going to presentation mode.
There we go. Sorry, I'll get back into it. So yeah, welcome to everyone from the Upper North Farming Systems. Michael Ayres, also work with Field Systems, and obviously members of Upper North and on the committee there. So yeah, thanks for organising this, Morgan. Well done, Ed. It was a very good coverage of everything, I think. Largely, my point now is just to go into a couple of other things in relation to a few other nutrients, just in terms of efficiency for these conditions now in relation to pricing, and also availability, especially in, yeah, what I'm about to go into with sulphur, and not so much the trace elements, but where they fit into that efficiency metric. So firstly, sulphur, yeah, as people will know, I do promote the use of sulphur in relation to nitrogen more so than anything else, just so that we do get these ratios right in our systems. As Ed rightly highlighted, just on efficiency, you know, volume versus efficiency and those sorts of things, we need to not drop something out of the system when it is necessary, even in lesser volume. And so importantly with sulphur, yes, chlorophyll formation, we can go through this list, you can read that, amino acids, building blocks, and we need building blocks, just like putting Lego together. Very important for the money that we've spent on a crop to understand where sulphur fits in, certainly with legumes and nodulation, structural componentry of protein in grains, and that's quality of grain and quantity related. It's very much a summary here. And also your enzyme activation. So they're the catalysts, and I say the firing pins is like a detonator in a bullet. You know, they're a small part of a reaction, but they can cause and regulate a reaction, so they're necessary. So sulphur is a big part of that. So we just need to know where that fits in. I know there is a lack of sulphur fertilizers coming into play now, and a lot of the standard compounds are hard to get, the ones that we've previously had enough sulphur in. And sulfate of ammonia has obviously doubled in price like everything else. So not saying we have to keep up with the same rates, but we need to understand where our sulphur volumes are. So Ed talked about mineralisation, summer rain, you know, breakdown of organic matter. We're going to have some sulphur coming into the systems. We've done enough coring and soil pits in the Upper North to realise there is, in a lot of instances, sulphur at depth for later grain fill if we have enough moisture in the season, but we need to keep in touch with having enough sulphur at the right ratios going into at plant. And some guys obviously are using gypsum and smaller rates of gypsum to get enough sulphur and slower release, depending on the source of the gypsum. Yeah, just looking at how we've done things in the past and now with pricing, we just need to not forget sulphur. We can discuss that later. And also Jana's going to discuss sulphur as well, I think, later on. Firing pin 5, I know there's more than 5 micronutrients, but we just need to know from an efficiency perspective, largely to do with phosphorus and nitrogen this year, where they fit in. So I know we've done some micronutrient work in the upper north for some time and not necessarily shown the results that we would have expected. We've had very dry years, you know, during the term of that trial or series of trials. I know we've looked at nutrients in isolation, but they do tend to work together, and we have to realize that. So there's a reason you put copper, zinc and manganese together, you know, and those sorts of things, and that's to do, they can collectively contribute to one enzyme reaction and those sorts of things. So we need to be aware of that. Zinc, firstly, for us to get better efficiency out of P, even, we need to be looking at putting zinc in. If you don't have a liquid delivery system, certainly putting zinc on the seed is critical. These are lower cost items, I know, but they are critical. Zinc, the auxin, the first hormone cycle, early vigor, zinc is very much responsible for that. Not saying we don't have these nutrients in our soil, and doing enough soil testing in the upper north, I know that we don't, and they're kind of on the borderline in a lot of instances. In a dry year, we don't necessarily need any additional, but coming off like the higher summer rainfall or spring rainfall now and moving into this next season, I think there's an opportunity to still grow good crops off the back of stored moisture and things like that, which we love and we know and understand. So we need to be looking at these micronutrients. Manganese, photosynthesis, and drought and heat stress, and that can be early heat, largely not, but late in the season. So zinc's something you need early. I'd always put manganese in early if you could, as an early foliar spray. Copper I'd put on later, seed production, pollination, but not too late. Copper in a lot of instances goes on too late. And that's sometimes we've done trials and these nutrients have gone on too late to have the effect. And we need to be aware of that. So yeah, zinc on the seed, and obviously then probably your foliar, earlier zinc and manganese foliars. And I'm not saying do them all the time, but just choose and highlight where you need to do it based on soil type, soil performance, past history. I think we need to, yeah, obviously later copper, but that would be mid-season rather than late. Boron's an interesting one. Shoot, root and reproductive growth, seed set, absolutely critical. A lot of our soils have subsoil boron toxicity. We need to be aware of that. But in many instances, not always, we sometimes have boron deficiency in the topsoil. So when these crops get growing and going, they are slightly deficient in boron, and we need to be aware of that, especially for reproductive growth and seed set. I'm not saying put a huge amount on. And in a lot of cases you won't need to, but just sometimes we do miss that. And where we had huge results in micronutrient use, the molybdenum, just your management and your efficiency of N, not always in your legumes, also very much so in your cereals and any other crops. So I know I'm concentrating on crops here, but it's still very important for animal health and for grazing and things like that. We still need to be aware of that. So just critically moving into those and understanding those 5. So that firing pin 5 is what we'll concentrate on this year from a micronutrient point of view, and sulphur. And just to also say, superphosphate's also a source of sulphur as well. I didn't mention that. Sulphate of ammonia, gypsum, and as Ed highlighted, the manures and those sort of things. So don't leave it out, and understand where these micronutrients fit in. Young Matt, the ex-president of Upper North, just, yeah, cut and slice may not be nice, as Ed highlighted. Just be careful what you're taking out of a system. Sometimes people just drop, say, sulphur out, and they don't manage the ratios. So if you get your ratios right, you can drop your fertilizer level if you wanted to, within the boundaries of, Ed said, you know, the amount of P and those sort of things in the units. But yeah, just be careful cutting costs if it does cut your profit, and sometimes you may not realize. And all of this is dependent now on being able to get the fertilizers and those sorts of things. So I know there's a lot of other extraneous factors we need to consider, but just be careful cutting things out. You're better off bringing everything down at the same correct ratio, if you like, rather than dropping things out. Understanding your landscape. Thanks, Wal, for that photo. But just you guys do, as farmers, understand your landscape very well. You know where the soil changes, you know the elevation changes and everything. And it's just understanding where your soil types change and then understanding what their requirements are. Some soil types in the upper north don't need sulphur and some do. I'm not saying to go and variable rate everything, but as was just highlighted before, the amount of expertise in that precision ag variable rate space within the upper north is substantial. So utilize all of those people if you can to make these decisions. Plants will always tell you something. This is down at Yandiah, but we talk about phosphorus availability and different pools and efficiency, but inefficiency, and as I said, the bicarbonate effect and the highly calcareous soil and those sort of things, we're dealing with a lot of inefficiency. So just be aware of them. It's not necessarily a deficiency. So as Ed pointed out, this mineralisation with the summer rain gives you far better efficiency with what's actually in your soil anyway. So we need to be aware of that. It's not all bad, summer rain, it's good.